The shotgun blast echoed through the midnight air as Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway of Ironwood Ranch, smoke curling from the barrel she held steady in her hands. 3 men lay groaning in the dirt, and behind her Jacob McKenna's eyes blazed with something she'd never seen before, not just fury, but fear of losing the only person who dared to stay. This is the story of how a desperate woman took a cursed job, faced down killers, and discovered that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with bullets, but with the courage to love again. Stay with me until the end and comment below which town you're watching from. I'd love to see how far our story has traveled tonight. The August sun bore down on Redstone, Texas with the kind of merciless heat that made the devil himself seek shade. Main Street stretched out like a dusty scar through the heart of town, lined with weathered buildings that leaned against each other like drunks after last call. At Garrett's General Store, where the floorboards creaked with every step, and the air smelled of tobacco and dried beans, a yellowed notice had hung on the wall for so long that most folks had stopped seeing it altogether. Housekeeper wanted at Ironwood Ranch. Good pay, no questions asked. Old Pete Garrett stood behind his counter, wiping down the same spot he'd been cleaning for the past hour, watching through the window as a woman approached his store. She moved with purpose, though her dress was travel-worn, and her boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each determined step. When she pushed through the door, the bell above it rang with a clarity that made everyone inside turn to look. Clara Whitmore had the kind of face that told stories without speaking, sharp cheekbones that suggested she'd missed too many meals, eyes the color of storm clouds that had seen too much, and a set to her jaw that said she'd decided to stop running from whatever had been chasing her. Her dark hair was pinned up properly, but wisps had escaped in the heat, framing her face in a way that might have been becoming if she'd had any interest in being becoming. She didn't. She had interest in one thing only: survival. "Ma'am." Pete nodded, his weathered face creasing into practiced politeness. "Help you find something." Clara's gaze swept the store, taking in the pickle barrels, the bolts of fabric, the sacks of flour stacked against the wall. Then her eyes found what she'd come for, the notice about Ironwood Ranch. She walked over to it, pulled it from the wall with one swift motion, and brought it to the counter. "This position," she said, her voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested she'd come from somewhere further south. "Is it still available?" The store went quiet. Even the flies seemed to stop buzzing. Pete's hand paused in its endless wiping. At the checkers table in the corner, 2 old-timers looked up from their game, and by the fabric counter, Mrs. Henderson stopped fingering a bolt of calico. "That's been up there near on 3 years, miss," Pete said carefully. "Nobody's wanted it." "Somebody wants it now," Clara replied, smoothing the paper on the counter. "How do I get to Ironwood Ranch?" Mrs. Henderson. A woman whose greatest pleasure in life was knowing everyone's business stepped forward. Her face was pinched with the effort of containing what she clearly considered vital information. "You don't know about Jacob McKenna." "I know he needs a housekeeper and pays well," Clara said. "That's all I need to know." "Oh, honey." Mrs. Henderson's voice dripped with the false sympathy of someone about to enjoy delivering bad news. "Jacob McKenna is, well, he's not right. Not since his wife died birthing their boy, and then the child following her not a month later. That was 4 years ago, and he's been like a ghost haunting his own land ever since. Why, the last 3 women who tried to work for him didn't last a week. Mary Sullivan said he didn't speak a single word to her the entire time, just left lists of chores and disappeared into that workshop of his." Claire's expression didn't change. "How much does he pay?" $20 a month plus room and board," Pete answered, shooting Mrs. Henderson a warning look. "It's good money, miss, but nothing," Clara interrupted. $20 a month is $20 more than I have now. Which way to Ironwood?" Pete studied her for a long moment, taking in the determined set of her shoulders, the way her fingers didn't tremble, even though he could see the hunger in the hollows of her cheeks. 10 miles north, follow the creek until you see the iron gates. Big house on the hill. Can't miss it." He paused. "You sure about this, Miss Jacob McKenna? He's not cruel, but he's broken. And that kind of broken can be contagious." Clara tucked the notice into her small satchel next to a tarnished silver brooch, the only thing of value she still possessed. "Broken things can be mended, Mr. Garrett. Sometimes they just need someone who's not afraid to try. She turned to leave, but Mrs. Henderson couldn't resist one more attempt. Where are you from, dear? Do you have family? Someone we should notify if... No family, Clara said flatly, her hand on the door. No one to notify. Good day. As the door closed behind her, Pete shook his head. That woman's running from something. Or to something, one of the checker players mused. Sometimes when you've got nothing left to lose, even a haunted ranch looks like salvation. Clara heard none of their speculation. She was already walking north following the directions to Ironwood Ranch, her boots raising dust devils in the afternoon heat. The satchel bounced against her hip with each step the brooch inside it. Her mother's brooch, the last thing she'd grabbed before fleeing Austin, clicking against the few coins she had left. The truth was, she was running. Running from a scandal that wasn't her fault, but had her name attached to it nonetheless. Running from the moment she discovered her employer's son forcing himself on the young maid, and her intervention had led to accusations that she'd been the one to seduce him. Running from the way good society had closed ranks, choosing to believe the promising young lawyer over the spinster housekeeper who dared to speak against him. But more than running from, she was running out of money, out of options, out of places where her name wasn't known. Redstone was the end of the line, a Dust Bowl town where the train only stopped twice a week, and most folks were too concerned with their own survival to care about gossip from Austin. The walk to Ironwood took her 3 hours. The sun was beginning its descent when she finally saw the iron gates Pete had mentioned. They stood open rust eating at the corner's weeds growing up around the posts. The name Ironwood was worked into the metal, though several letters had come loose and hung at odd angles. Beyond the gates, a dirt road wound up a hill toward a house that must have been magnificent once. Even in its current state of neglect, Ironwood Ranch commanded attention. It was a 2-story limestone structure with deep verandas wrapped around both levels, the kind of home built by someone with dreams of generations living within its walls. Now paint peeled from the shutters, and several windows were boarded over. The gardens that must have once been the pride of the property had gone wild roses climbing unchecked over arbors, their blooms fighting through tangles of thorns. Clara paused at the gates, allowing herself one moment of uncertainty. Then she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked through. The front door was solid oak, scarred by weather, but still imposing. She knocked firmly, the sound echoing in the evening stillness. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. "Mr. McKenna?" she called. "Mr. McKenna, I'm here about the housekeeper position." Still nothing. Clara tried the door handle and found it unlocked. She pushed it open, stepping into a foyer that smelled of dust and abandonment. Sheets covered the furniture like shrouds, and cobwebs draped the chandelier overhead. "Mr. McKenna," she called again, moving deeper into the house. She found him in what must have been the dining room, though the table was covered with woodworking tools rather than place settings. Jacob McKenna sat hunched over his work, carving something with the focused intensity of a man trying to chase away demons. He didn't look up when she entered. Clara had expected someone old, broken down by grief. But Jacob McKenna couldn't have been more than 35, though sorrow had etched lines around his eyes that belonged to a much older man. His dark hair was too long, falling across his forehead as he worked. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle from physical labor. There was nothing soft about him, nothing that invited approach or comfort. "Mr. McKenna," Clara said firmly. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I'm here about the job." His hand stilled on the wood, but he didn't look up. "Job's been filled." "No, it hasn't," Clara countered. "The notice is still up at Garrett's store. Has been for 3 years from what I hear." "Then you also heard that nobody stays." His voice was rough from disuse, like a gate that hadn't been opened in too long. "Save yourself the trouble." Clara set down her satchel with a decisive thump. "With respect, Mr. McKenna, you don't know what kind of trouble I'm capable of handling. I need this job, and from the looks of this place, you need someone to do it. I'm not asking for your friendship or your conversation. I'm offering to clean your house, cook your meals, and tend to what needs tending. $20 a month, room and board." That was the offer, wasn't it? Finally, he looked up, and Clara felt the impact of his gaze like a physical blow. His eyes were the color of winter bark brown, shot through with gray, and they held the kind of emptiness that came from losing everything that mattered. But there was something else there too, a flicker of surprise perhaps that someone was standing in his dining room arguing with him instead of fleeing. "You're not from around here, he said. It wasn't a question. "No." Running from something. Clara met his gaze steadily. "We're all running from something, Mr. McKenna. Question is whether we're running toward something too." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her worn dress, her determined stance, the way she didn't flinch under his scrutiny. Then he returned to his carving. "Room's upstairs, second door on the right. Kitchen's through there. I eat at 6 noon and 6. I don't like noise. I don't like change. And I don't like questions." "Understood," Clara said, picking up her satchel. "I'll need a day to get this place in order before I can promise proper meals. Tonight will have to be simple." "There's nothing in the pantry." "Then I'll make do with nothing until I can get to town for supplies tomorrow. I'll need money for groceries." He pulled out his wallet, extracted several bills without counting them, and set them on the table. "That cover it." Clara looked at the money more than she'd seen in months. "It'll do for a start." She headed for the kitchen, but his voice stopped her at the doorway. "The others left because they couldn't stand the silence," he said without looking up. "Or because they thought they could fix me. I don't want to be fixed, Miss Whitmore. I just want to be left alone." "Good," Clara replied. "Because I'm not in the fixing business. I'm in the cooking and cleaning business. You stay out of my way, I'll stay out of yours." The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, some growing mold. The stove was caked with grease and mouse droppings dotted the counters. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She heated water, found soap under the sink, and began the long process of reclaiming the space. As she worked, she could hear the sound of Jacob's carving from the dining room, steady, rhythmic, almost meditative. She found a few potatoes in a barrel, some dried beans, and, miracle of miracles, a ham hock wrapped in cheesecloth in the back of the pantry. It would make a decent soup, nothing fancy, but filling. By the time she called him for dinner, the kitchen was, if not spotless, at least sanitary. She'd set one place at the kitchen table. She'd seen no evidence that he entertained or would welcome company at his meals. Jacob entered the kitchen and stopped short, clearly surprised by the transformation. The windows were clean, letting in the last of the evening light. The floor had been swept and mopped. The soup pot bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the first good smell the room had known in years. He sat down without comment and ate in silence. Clara busied herself with cleaning the stove, not attempting conversation. When he finished, he set his bowl by the sink and left without a word. Clara finished her own meal, the first hot food she'd had in 3 days, then climbed the stairs to inspect her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. The window looked out over what must have once been a vegetable garden. She could make this work. She had to make this work. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, Clara heard sounds from somewhere else in the house. Footsteps pacing a door opening and closing, and once what sounded like something being thrown against a wall. She pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and closed her eyes. Whatever demons Jacob McKenna was fighting, they were his to battle. She had her own to contend with. The next morning, Clara was up before dawn. She found Jacob already gone, probably to tend to whatever livestock remained on the ranch. She made a list of supplies needed and set off for town just as the sun was painting the horizon pink. Pete Garrett's eyebrows rose when she walked into his store. "Well, I'll be. You survived the night." "I did more than survive," Clara said, handing him her list. "I need these things delivered to Ironwood this afternoon. Mr. McKenna gave me money for the purchases." Pete whistled low at the extensive list. "This is more food than Jacob's bought in a year. You really mean to stay, don't you?" "I mean to do the job I was hired for," Clara said simply. As Pete gathered her supplies, Mrs. Henderson sidled up. "So what's it like up there? Is he as strange as they say? Does he really never speak?" "Mr. McKenna is a private man who values his privacy," Clara said coolly. "As do I." But Mrs. Henderson wasn't easily deterred. "You know his wife was my cousin's friend. Beautiful girl Sarah was. Came from San Antonio, brought a dowry that helped Jacob build that ranch up proper. They were so happy, at least at first, but something changed when she got pregnant. She became fearful, wouldn't say why. Some say too much," Clara interrupted. "Good day, Mrs. Henderson." She left the store with the promise that the supplies would be delivered by afternoon. On her way back to Ironwood, she passed the cemetery. On impulse, she turned in, wandering among the headstones, until she found what she was looking for, a large marble monument with two names. Sarah McKenna, aged 22. Beloved wife and mother. And below it, Thomas McKenna, aged 3 weeks, God's littlest angel. Clara stood there for a moment, understanding a bit more about the weight Jacob carried. To lose both wife and child within a month, no wonder he'd retreated from the world. She traced the carved letters with one finger, then headed back to the ranch. When the supplies arrived, Clara threw herself into the work of making Ironwood livable again. She started with the kitchen and dining room, then moved on to the parlor. She didn't touch Jacob's workshop space in the dining room, but she cleaned around it, careful not to disturb his tools or the pieces of wood he was carving. As the days passed, a routine developed. Jacob would be gone when she woke, working the ranch with his sole remaining ranch hand, an old Mexican man named Miguel, who lived in a cottage near the barn. She would have breakfast ready when he returned lunch at noon, dinner at 6. He ate in silence, she cleaned in silence. It should have been oppressive, but Clara found it oddly peaceful. After months of running, of looking over her shoulder, of wondering when her past would catch up with her, the silence of Ironwood was a refuge. She began to learn Jacob's patterns. He liked his coffee black and strong enough to float a horseshoe. He preferred simple food, stew, cornbread, beans, and bacon. He worked in his workshop every evening, carving pieces of wood into intricate shapes. She realized after finding several finished pieces in a room she was cleaning that he was making toys, horses, soldiers, trains. Toys for a child who would never play with them. One evening, about 2 weeks into her employment, Clara made a decision. She prepared dinner as usual, but this time she set 2 places at the table. When Jacob came in, he stopped staring at the second place setting. "I thought I'd join you," Clara said, not looking at him as she ladled stew into bowls. "Seems foolish to eat separately when we're the only 2 people in this house." For a moment she thought he might refuse, might order her to remove the second setting, but he simply sat down in his usual chair. Clara took the other seat and they ate in silence. It wasn't companionable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a start. As the weeks turned into a month, small changes began to creep into their routine. Clara started humming while she worked, not loudly, just soft melodies that seemed to make the house less oppressive. She opened windows that had been closed for years, letting in fresh air and sunlight. She brought wildflowers in from the fields and put them in vases throughout the house. Jacob never commented on these changes, but Clara noticed he didn't order her to stop either. And once she caught him pausing by a vase of yellow roses she'd placed in the hallway, his fingers barely brushing the petals before he walked on. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into her employment. Clara was cleaning out a storage room when she found them, recipe books clearly well-loved with notations in feminine handwriting. Sarah's recipes. She brought one to the kitchen intending to try a cake recipe that had notes saying Jacob's favorite in the margin. She was pulling the cake from the oven when Jacob walked in for dinner. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon filled the kitchen and he stopped dead in the doorway. "Where did you get that recipe?" His voice was sharp, almost angry. Clara held his gaze steadily. "I found your wife's recipe books in the storage room. I thought, you thought wrong." He turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped him. "She wrote that it was your favorite," Clara said quietly. "She wanted you to enjoy it. Don't dishonor her memory by refusing the things she made with love." Jacob stood frozen in the doorway, his back to her shoulders, rigid with tension. For a long moment, Clara thought he might walk out, might even dismiss her on the spot. Then slowly he turned back and sat down at the table. Clara cut him a slice of the cake, set it before him, and went back to preparing the rest of dinner. She watched from the corner of her eye as he took a bite, saw his eyes close as the familiar flavors hit him. When she looked again, there were tears on his cheeks, silent testimony to a grief too deep for words. She said nothing, just continued with dinner preparations. But when she set his plate before him, their eyes met for a moment, and something passed between them. Not quite friendship, but perhaps understanding. That night, Clara heard him in his workshop late into the evening, but the sounds were different. Instead of the harsh scraping of angry carving, there was a gentler rhythm, as if he were crafting something with care rather than using the wood as an outlet for rage. The next morning, she found a small carved bird on the kitchen table, delicate and perfect in its detail. There was no note, but she knew it was meant for her. She picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth wood, and smiled the first real smile she'd managed since leaving Austin. Fall arrived with a sudden cold snap that had Clara scrambling to prepare the house for winter. She made lists of needed repairs, windows that wouldn't close properly, gaps in the walls where wind whistled through a chimney that clearly hadn't been cleaned in years. "Mr. McKenna," she said one evening as they ate dinner still in relative silence, but now a comfortable quiet rather than oppressive. "The house needs work before winter sets in properly, the north windows especially, and the chimney in the parlor." He nodded. "I'll see to it." "Miguel could help, I'm sure, and perhaps we could hire—" "I said I'll see to it." His tone was final, and Clara didn't push. But the next day she was surprised to see not just Jacob and Miguel working on the windows, but two other men from town. Even more surprising, Jacob was actually talking to them, not much, but giving instructions discussing the work. It was the most she'd heard him speak to anyone besides her. As she brought coffee and sandwiches out to the workers, one of them, a young man named Tom, grinned at her. "Ma'am, I have to say we're all mighty impressed. Jacob here hasn't hired anyone for anything in years. You must be working some kind of magic up here." "No magic," Clara said simply. "Just good cooking and common sense." But Tom's words stayed with her. Was she changing Jacob McKenna? Or was he simply remembering who he'd been before grief consumed him? That evening, as Jacob worked in his workshop and Clara darned socks by the fire, she found herself speaking without planning to. "My mother had a brooch," she said quietly. "Silver with a small sapphire in the center. Nothing fancy, but she wore it every Sunday to church. When she died, it was the only thing of value she left me." Jacob's carving paused, but he didn't look up. Clara continued. "I've sold everything else over the years, her wedding ring, her books, even the family Bible, but I've kept that brooch. Sometimes holding on to one beautiful thing from the past is what gets us through the present." "Why are you telling me this?" Jacob asked, his voice rough. "Because I think you're holding on to the wrong things," Clara said gently. "You're holding on to the pain, the guilt, the anger, but you're letting go of the joy, the love, the good memories. That cake recipe your wife wanted you to remember, the happiness, not just the loss." Jacob was quiet for so long, Clara thought he wouldn't respond. Then so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "Her name was Sarah. The baby was Thomas." "Tell me about them," Clara said softly. And to her amazement, he did. Haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, Jacob talked about meeting Sarah at a dance in San Antonio, how she'd laughed when he stepped on her toes, but agreed to a second dance anyway. He talked about their wedding, how radiant she'd looked, how proud he'd been to call her his wife. He spoke of building the ranch together, their plans for a large family, the joy when she told him she was expecting. She was scared near the end, he said, his hand still on the wood. Said she had dreams, bad ones. "I told her it was just nerves, that everything would be fine. I should have listened, should have taken her to San Antonio where there were better doctors." "You couldn't have known," Clara said firmly. "Sometimes life takes from us, no matter how careful we are, how much we plan. It's not about blame, Mr. McKenna. It's about living with the loss without letting it destroy us." Jacob finally looked up at her, and for the first time she saw the man he must have been before, strong, capable, even handsome in a rugged way. "You sound like you know something about loss, Miss Whitmore." Clara's hand went unconsciously to her satchel, where the brooch rested. "We all carry our ghosts, Mr. McKenna. The trick is not letting them drive the wagon." A small smile, barely there but unmistakable, crossed his face. "Sarah would have liked you. She had a way of cutting straight to the heart of things, too." It was the first time Clara had seen him smile, and it transformed his face, taking years off his appearance. She found herself smiling back, and for a moment the kitchen felt warm with more than just the heat from the stove. But the moment was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. Jacob frowned, moving to the window. "3 riders coming hard, stay inside." He grabbed a rifle from beside the door and stepped out onto the porch. Clara ignored his instruction, moving to the window to watch. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, and even from inside Clara could hear the tension in their voices. "McKenna," the lead rider called. "Silas Grant wants to talk to you." "Silas can go to hell," Jacob replied evenly. "He knows he's not welcome here. He says to tell you he's making one last offer. Good money for this place, more than it's worth in its current state." My answer hasn't changed in 4 years, and it won't change now. Get off my land. The rider laughed ugly and threatening. Silas thought you might say that. He said to tell you he's got ways of changing a man's mind, and that pretty new housekeeper of yours would be a shame if something happened to her. The rifle in Jacob's hand swung up, aimed directly at the speaker. You threaten anyone under my protection again, and Silas Grant will be shy 3 ranch hands. Now get out. The riders exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses around and galloped off. Jacob stood on the porch, rifle still raised, until they were out of sight. When he came back inside, his face was grim. Pack your things, he said to Clara. I'll take you to town in the morning. Find somewhere else to work. No, Clara said simply. Jacob stared at her. This isn't a discussion. Silas Grant is dangerous. He wants this land, has wanted it since before. He stopped, jaw-clenching. Since before your wife died, Clara guessed. Is that what this is about? Some old feud. Silas and I served together in the war, Jacob said reluctantly. Came back here together, both of us, with plans to build something. But Silas's idea of building is to take from others. He's acquired 6 ranches in the past 5 years, all through intimidation, foreclosure, or worse. Ironwood sits right in the middle of what he wants to be his empire. And you won't sell. This land is all I have left of them, Jacob said quietly. Sarah loved this place. We were going to raise Thomas here, teach him to work the land. I'll die before I let Silas Grant take it. Clara moved closer to him, close enough to see the pain etched in every line of his face. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't come to that. I'm not running Mr. McKenna. Not from Silas Grant, not from anyone. I've done enough running. Jacob looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Why, this isn't your fight. Clara thought of the scandal in Austin, of the powerful men who'd destroyed her reputation without a second thought. Maybe not, but I'm tired of men like Silas Grant thinking they can take whatever they want. Besides, she added with a small smile, I just got this kitchen the way I like it. I'd hate to have to start over somewhere else. Despite the tension, Jacob's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Whitmore. Probably both, Clara admitted. But I'm also very stubborn. Now tell me more about Silas Grant. If he's going to be a problem, I'd like to know what we're facing. Jacob studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. But first, let me show you how to use a rifle. The next hours were spent in an impromptu shooting lesson behind the house. Clara had never held a gun before, but she was a quick learner, and by the time the sun set, she could hit a tin can at 20 paces more often than not. You're a natural, Jacob said, something like approval in his voice. Sarah was too. She could outshoot me on her good days. It was the second time that day he'd compared her to his late wife, and Clara wasn't sure how to feel about it. She wasn't trying to replace Sarah, had no intention of being anything more than what she was, a housekeeper earning her keep. But there was something in the way Jacob looked at her now, as if he were seeing her for the first time as a person, rather than just another temporary fixture in his self-imposed isolation. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about Silas Grant and his threats. She'd fled Austin to escape one dangerous situation only to land in another. But this felt different. In Austin, she'd been alone fighting against the word of respected men with no one to stand beside her. Here, she had an ally, broken though he might be. And Jacob McKenna, she was learning, was far from defeated despite his grief. The next few days passed with an undercurrent of tension. Jacob started wearing his gun, even when working close to the house. Miguel began carrying a rifle when he went to tend the cattle. And Clara found herself checking the windows more often, watching for riders on the horizon. But life went on. Meals were cooked, chores were done, and slowly, incrementally, the house continued its transformation from mausoleum to home. Clara discovered Sarah's sewing basket and began mending curtains and linens. She found seeds in the garden shed and planned for spring planting. She even convinced Jacob to help her move some furniture, opening up the parlor and making it less like a storage room and more like a place where people might actually want to sit. It was during one of these furniture moving sessions that they founded a leather journal that had fallen behind a heavy bookcase. Jacob recognized it immediately, his face going pale. Sarah's diary, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Clara reached for it, then hesitated. Do you want to read it? Jacob stared at the journal as if it might bite him. Then with shaking hands, he took it from her and opened it to a random page. His eyes scanned the words, and suddenly he sank into the nearest chair, the journal falling open in his lap. Clara moved to leave to give him privacy, but his hand shot out and caught her wrist. "Stay," he said roughly. "Please." So she stayed sitting across from him as he read his dead wife's words. Sometimes he would read aloud, sharing bits of Sarah's observations about the ranch, her excitement about the baby, her love for Jacob that seemed to pour from every page. Other times he would fall silent, tears running unchecked down his face as he encountered passages too personal to share. The journal entry that changed everything was dated just 2 weeks before Sarah's death. Jacob's voice cracked as he read it aloud. "I saw him again today, Silas Grant. He was watching the house from the ridge. When I told Jacob, he said I was imagining things, that pregnancy was making me anxious. But I know what I saw, the way Silas looks at me. It's not right. I'm afraid of what he might do if something happens to Jacob." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara watched as understanding dawned on Jacob's face, followed by a rage so intense she instinctively moved back. He stood abruptly, the journal falling to the floor, and punched the wall so hard his knuckles came away bloody. "I'll kill him," Jacob said, his voice deadly quiet. "If he had anything to do with Sarah's death." "You don't know that," Clara said firmly, though her own mind was racing. "Women die in childbirth. It's tragic, but it happens." "The doctor said it was unusual," Jacob said, pacing now like a caged animal. "Said she was healthy, strong. There was no reason for the bleeding to be so severe. And then Thomas—" He stopped, his face contorting with pain. "The wet nurse said he just stopped breathing one night. But what if—" "Stop," Clara commanded, surprising them both with her authority. "You can't go down that path without proof. And even if Silas Grant is guilty of something, getting yourself hanged for murder won't bring them back." Jacob whirled on her, eyes blazing. "Then what would you have me do? Let him take everything—" "I'd have you be smart," Clara shot back. "If Silas Grant is the monster you think he is, then he's dangerous. You go after him with just rage and a gun and you'll end up dead. Then he gets Ironwood anyway, and Sarah and Thomas died for nothing." The fight seemed to drain out of Jacob. He slumped against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "I failed them. I should have listened to her fears, should have protected them." Clara moved closer, her voice gentler now. "You loved them. That's not failure. And if you want to honor their memory, you'll protect what they loved, this ranch, this home. But you'll do it smart, not reckless." Jacob looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You're not just a housekeeper, are you, Clara Whitmore?" "There's more to your story." Clara hesitated, then decided on partial truth. "I worked for a wealthy family in Austin. The son, he wasn't a good man. When I tried to protect another girl in the household, he turned it around, said I was the one who'd made advances. His family believed him or pretended to. My reputation was destroyed overnight. I ran because staying meant jail, or worse." "So you understand," Jacob said quietly, "what it's like to have powerful men take everything from you." "I understand that fighting them head-on is usually suicide," Clara replied. "But I also understand that sometimes if you're clever enough, you can beat them at their own game." Over the next few days, they developed a routine of vigilance. Clara took to carrying a small pistol Jacob gave her tucked into her apron pocket. Miguel reported seeing riders on the borders of the property, never crossing over but always watching. And at night, either Jacob or Miguel would take turns keeping watch. It was during one of Clara's turns at the window Jacob had finally trusted her enough to take a shift that she saw the fire, a red glow on the horizon in the direction of town. She woke Jacob immediately. "That's the direction of the Hendricks place," Jacob said, pulling on his boots. "Stay here. Keep the rifle ready." "You're not going alone," Clara said, already reaching for her shawl. "Clara, we go together or you don't go at all, Chet," she said firmly. "I won't sit here wondering if you're riding into a trap." They saddled horses quickly and rode hard toward the fire. As they got closer, they could see it was indeed the Hendricks ranch, or what was left of it. The barn was fully engulfed, and men were forming a bucket brigade to keep the fire from spreading to the house. Jacob and Clara joined the effort, working through the night alongside their neighbors. By dawn, the fire was out, but the barn was a total loss. Tom Hendricks, a man in his 60s who'd ranched the land for 40 years, sat on his porch steps looking defeated. "It was Grant's men," he said quietly when Jacob approached. "They came with an offer yesterday. I refused. This was their response." "Did you see them?" Jacob asked. "Can you prove it?" Tom shook his head. "They're too smart for that. But I know. Just like I know they'll be back with another offer, and this time I'll have to take it. Can't rebuild without the barn, and I don't have the money for lumber." Clara, who'd been listening, stepped forward. "What if you had help? What if all the ranchers worked together?" Tom laughed bitterly. "Against Silas Grant. He owns the bank, has the sheriff in his pocket. Fighting him is like fighting the wind." "Wind can be blocked with the right windbreak," Clara said. "What if every rancher agreed to help rebuild your barn? What if everyone stood together?" "The lady's got a point," said another rancher, Ben Cooper. "Grant can't fight all of us at once." "Can't he?" Tom asked. "He's got money men in the law. What do we have?" "Each other," Jacob said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. It was the most he'd said in public in years. Sarah used to say that community was the only thing that made frontier life bearable. Maybe it's time we remembered that. The meeting that followed was impromptu but passionate. Right there in the smoky dawn, surrounded by the smell of charred wood, the ranchers of Redstone began to organize. They would rebuild Tom's barn together. They would share the cost of lumber, and they would watch each other's properties. "Grant won't like this," Ben warned. "He'll escalate." "Then we'll be ready," Jacob replied, and Clara felt a surge of pride at the determination in his voice. Over the next week, Ironwood became the unofficial headquarters of the resistance against Silas Grant. Ranchers came and went, bringing news and making plans. Clara found herself cooking for groups of men, serving coffee during strategy meetings, and offering her own insights when asked. It was during one of these meetings that she first saw Silas Grant up close. He rode up to Ironwood with 6 men bold as brass in the middle of the day. Clara was in the garden when they arrived, and she straightened one hand, going to the pistol in her pocket. Silas Grant was not what she'd expected. He was handsome in a cold way, with silver-streaked hair and pale blue eyes that reminded her of winter ice. He dressed like a gentleman, but there was something predatory in the way he moved, dismounting his horse with the controlled grace of a man who knew his own power. "Miss Whitmore," he said, tipping his hat to her, "I've heard so much about you, the woman who tamed Jacob McKenna." "Mr. McKenna doesn't need taming," Clara replied evenly, "and you're trespassing." Grant smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Such fire. I can see why Jacob keeps you around, though I wonder if he's told you the whole truth about his situation." Before Clara could respond, Jacob emerged from the house, rifle in hand. "Get off my land, Silas." Now, Jacob, is that any way to greet an old friend? I came to make you one last civilized offer. 50,000 for Ironwood. That's twice what it's worth." "It's not for sale," Jacob said flatly. "Everything's for sale," Grant countered. "It's just a matter of price, or pressure." His eyes flickered to Clara. "Pretty woman like that working in a house with a single man. People talk. Wouldn't take much to ruin her reputation entirely. I heard there was already some trouble in Austin." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. How could he know about Austin? Jacob stepped forward, the rifle raising slightly. "You investigate her. You threaten her." "I protect my investments," Grant said smoothly. "And Ironwood will be mine one way or another. The lady's past just gives me options." "The lady's past is none of your business," Clara said, finding her voice. "And neither is this ranch." Grant laughed. "Oh, I do like you. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, did you know that Jacob here killed 3 men in cold blood during the war? Or that he was court-martialed, only got off because I testified on his behalf? He owes me more than he wants to admit." "The men I killed were raiders attacking civilians," Jacob said through gritted teeth. "And you testified because you knew I'd expose your war profiteering if you didn't." "Details?" Grant waved dismissively. "The point is, we have history, Jacob. Sarah understood that. She was going to convince you to sell, before her unfortunate passing." The rifle in Jacob's hand swung up, aimed directly at Grant's chest. "Don't you dare speak her name." Grant's men went for their guns, but Grant raised a hand to stop them. "You won't shoot me, Jacob. You're not a killer anymore. You're just a broken man holding on to a dead dream. He mounted his horse with casual elegance. 60 days, Jacob. You have 60 days to accept my offer. After that, things get unpleasant. As they rode away, Clara saw Jacob's hands shaking. She gently took the rifle from him, her fingers brushing his. He's trying to get in your head. Don't let him. What if he's right? Jacob asked quietly. What if I am just a broken man? Clara turned to face him fully, her expression fierce. Then be broken, but be broken in fighting, be broken and brave, be broken and still standing. That's more than Silas Grant will ever be with all his money and men. That night, Jacob didn't retreat to his workshop after dinner. Instead, he sat with Clara by the fire, staring into the flames. Tell me about Austin, he said suddenly. The whole truth. Clara hesitated, then slowly told him everything. About James Worthington, the judge's son, who thought household servants were his for the taking. About finding him forcing himself on the teenage scullery maid. About hitting him with a poker to make him stop. About how he'd turned it around claiming Clara had seduced him and attacked him when he refused her advances. The girl was too frightened to speak up, Clara said quietly. His mother believed him or chose to. Within a day, there were warrants out for my arrest. I ran that night with nothing but my mother's brooch and the clothes on my back. The brooch you keep in your satchel, Jacob said. It wasn't a question. You noticed? I notice everything about you, Jacob admitted, then seemed surprised by his own words. I know what you mean, Clara said softly. And she did. Over the weeks, awareness had been growing between them, unspoken but undeniable. The way his presence filled a room, the way her humming made him pause in his work, the way they moved around each other in the kitchen, a dance of familiarity that had developed without conscious thought. Silas will use Austin against you, Jacob said, returning to safer ground. He'll make it public force you to run again. Let him try, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. I'm done running. Jacob looked at her for a long moment. You could have a good life somewhere else, somewhere safe. I could give you money references. Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. McKenna? I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection, Clara said firmly. I need a job and a place to stand my ground. Unless you're dissatisfied with my work. No, Jacob said quickly. No, your work is... The house hasn't looked this good since... He trailed off, but Clara understood. Since Sarah. Then the matter is settled, Clara said, rising. Now, if we're going to fight Silas Grant, we need to be smart about it. He mentioned war profiteering. What did he mean? Jacob's face darkened. During the war, Silas was in charge of supply lines. He was selling army supplies to civilians at inflated prices, pocketing the difference. Men were going without boots and blankets while he got rich. Can you prove it? I had documents once. Letters, receipts. But they were in the safe and... Jacob paused, his eyes widening. The safe. Sarah knew the combination. She might have... He was on his feet, moving quickly toward his study, a room Clara had been forbidden to clean. The study was dusty, but organized, dominated by a large safe in the corner. Jacob knelt before it, spinning the combination with practiced ease. Inside were papers, gold coins, and a leather portfolio Clara recognized as the type lawyers used. Jacob pulled out the portfolio and opened it. His hands stilled. She kept them. Sarah kept everything. He looked up at Clara, his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. These documents prove Silas's war crimes. They're enough to destroy him. Then why haven't you used them? Because he has something too, Jacob admitted. The court-martial records. Out of context, they make me look like a murderer. And with Sarah gone, I didn't care what people thought of me. But now you have something to fight for, Clara finished. Someone, Jacob corrected quietly, then caught himself. Something. The ranch, I mean. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. We need to think strategically. If you reveal what you have on Grant, he'll retaliate with what he has on you. It's a stalemate. Unless we can find something else, Jacob said thoughtfully. Something current. Silas has been careful since the war, but he can't be perfect. The burned barn, Clara said suddenly. What if there were witnesses? What if someone saw his men? Even if they did, they'd be too scared to testify. Maybe. Or maybe they just need to know they're not alone. Over the next few days, Clara became a detective. She visited the neighboring ranches under the pretense of sharing recipes or borrowing supplies, but really she was gathering information. She learned that the Hendricks fire wasn't the first suspicious incident. There had been poisoned wells, cut fences, missing cattle, always after a rancher refused to sell to Grant. It was at the Miller Ranch that she struck gold. Young Betty Miller, just 16, pulled Clara aside while her mother was distracted. "I saw them," she whispered. "The night of the fire. 3 men, one with a scar across his jaw. They were laughing as they rode away." "Would you testify to that?" Clara asked. Betty looked terrified. "Mr. Grant would kill us all." "Not if we all stand together," Clara said firmly. "Not if we refuse to be afraid." When Clara returned to Ironwood with this information, she found Jacob in heated discussion with Ben Cooper and Tom Hendricks. Grant had made moves to call in loans at the bank, putting pressure on anyone who'd stood against him. "We need to act fast," Ben was saying, "before he strangles us financially." "Betty Miller saw his men," Clara announced. "She can identify them." The room went quiet. Tom shook his head. "A 16-year-old girl's word against Silas Grant. That's not enough." "It is if we combine it with other testimony," Clara insisted. "If everyone who's been threatened or attacked speaks up." "They won't," Ben said flatly. "Grant owns this town." "He owns the fear in this town," Clara corrected. "There's a difference." Jacob was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What are you suggesting?" "A town meeting, public. Everyone invited, including Grant. Let him come and watch as people stand up and tell their stories. Make it impossible for him to operate in the shadows." "That's dangerous," Tom warned. "Grant doesn't like being cornered." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Cornered men make mistakes." The meeting was set for Sunday after church. Word spread quickly, and the atmosphere in town became electric with tension. Grant's men were seen everywhere, watching, listening, intimidating. On Saturday night, Clara was alone at Ironwood. Jacob had gone to help Miguel with a sick cow when she heard horses approaching. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. 4 riders dismounting near the house. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the lead man's scarred jaw, one of the men Betty had seen. Clara didn't hesitate. She fired a warning shot through the window, shattering glass. "Next one won't be a warning," she called out. The men took cover behind their horses. "Now, miss, we just came to talk," Scarface called. "Mr. Grant wants to make you an offer." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard it yet. $1,000 in safe passage to anywhere you want. All you have to do is leave tonight." "Go to hell." She heard them spreading out, trying to surround the house. Clara moved quickly, barricading the front door, checking the back. Her hands were steady despite her racing heart. She'd faced down one powerful man's threats in Austin. She wouldn't run from another. The attack came from 2 directions at once. The front door shuddered under heavy blows, while glass broke in the kitchen. Clara fired at the shadow in the kitchen window, heard a yelp of pain. But she couldn't be in 2 places at once. The front door gave way just as Jacob and Miguel arrived. The gunfight that followed was brief but vicious. Clara saw Jacob transform from grieving widower to deadly fighter. In an instant, his movements precise and lethal. Miguel, despite his age, proved equally formidable. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Grant's men were dead, one was wounded, and Scarface had fled. Clara stood in the doorway, rifle still smoking, her face pale but determined. Jacob crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." He stared at her for a long moment, something raw and desperate in his eyes. Then suddenly he pulled her against him, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing. "Don't ever scare me like that again." Clara's arms came up around him slowly, feeling the solid warmth of him, the way he trembled slightly. "I won't if you won't," she whispered. They stood there in the doorway holding each other while Miguel diplomatically dealt with the bodies and the wounded man. Finally, Jacob pulled back his hands, framing her face. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known." "Second bravest," Clara corrected gently. "Sarah faced down her fears every day." "Sarah would have liked you," Jacob said softly. "She would have said you were exactly what I needed." "And what's that?" "Someone who won't let me give up." The moment was interrupted by the sound of more horses. Sheriff Dixon arrived with a posse, his face grim. Clara noticed several of the men wore badges but had the look of Grant's hired guns. Got a report of shooting, Dixon said, surveying the scene. Looks like murder to me. Looks like self-defense, Jacob countered. These men broke into my home, threatened my housekeeper. That's not how Mr. Grant tells it, Dixon said. Says your woman here invited his men over, then ambushed them. Clara laughed sharp and bitter. Of course he does. Men like Grant always blame the woman. Dixon's face reddened. You'll need to come with me, miss. Both of you, actually. On what charges? Jacob demanded. Murder, for starters. The crowd that had gathered began to mutter. Tom Hendricks stepped forward. Now hold on, Sheriff. We all know what really happened here. Do you? Dixon asked. Were you here? I was, Miguel said firmly. I saw everything. These men attacked. We defended. The word of a Mexican ranch hand, Dixon scoffed. That won't hold up. The racism in his tone made Clara's blood boil. The word of an honest man against hired killers. I'll take those odds. The standoff might have escalated, but suddenly Ben Cooper spoke up. Sheriff, before you arrest anyone, might want to know that Judge Harrison is on his way from Austin. Should be here tomorrow for the town meeting. Maybe we should let him sort this out. Dixon looked uncertain. Arresting Jacob and Clara was one thing, but doing it right before a judge arrived was another. Fine, but nobody leaves town, and those bodies need explaining. As the sheriff and his men left with the wounded attacker and the bodies, Clara realized their home had become a fortress. Ranchers arrived throughout the night, armed and ready to stand guard. By morning, Ironwood was surrounded by allies. Jacob found Clara on the porch at dawn, watching the sun rise over the gathered men. Started something, haven't we? He said. Something that needed starting, Clara replied. Grant pushed too hard this time. People are ready to push back. Are you? Jacob asked quietly. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Grant won't back down easy. Clara looked at him, this man who'd lost everything and was still standing still, fighting. Neither will we. The church bells were ringing, calling people to Sunday service and the meeting that would follow. Clara went to dress in her best dress, the only one that wasn't work-worn. When she came downstairs, Jacob was waiting in a clean shirt and vest, looking more like the prosperous rancher he'd once been. You look, he started, then stopped, color rising in his cheeks. Like a housekeeper in her Sunday best, Clara finished for him. Like a woman worth fighting for, Jacob corrected, offering her his arm. As they walked to town together, surrounded by armed allies, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. Whatever happened at this meeting, whatever Grant tried to do, she wasn't alone anymore. And neither was Jacob. The church was packed, people spilling out into the yard. Judge Harrison, a stern-looking man with silver sideburns, had set up at a table at the front. Silas Grant sat in the first pew looking perfectly at ease, as if he owned the church along with everything else. What followed was nothing short of a battle for the soul of Redstone. One by one, ranchers stood up and told their stories. Betty Miller, trembling but determined, identified the men she'd seen. Tom Hendricks detailed the threats he'd received. Even Mrs. Henderson, the gossipy shopkeeper's wife, admitted to seeing Grant's men near suspicious fires. Grant's lawyer, brought in from San Antonio, tried to discredit each witness, but the sheer number of testimonies was overwhelming. Then Clara stood up. My name is Clara Whitmore, she began, her voice carrying clearly. I came to Redstone running from injustice in Austin. I thought I could hide here, keep quiet, avoid trouble. But I've learned that avoiding trouble just lets it grow stronger. Last night, 4 men broke into the home where I work. They offered me money to leave, and when I refused, they tried to force me. If Mr. McKenna and Miguel hadn't arrived when they did, I'd likely be dead. Can you prove these were my client's men? Grant's lawyer asked smoothly. One of them is sitting in your jail with a bullet wound I gave him, Clara replied. Ask him who sent him. The wounded man, when brought in, refused to talk at first. But when Judge Harrison threatened him with hanging for attempted murder, he broke. Yes, Grant had sent them. Yes, they'd burned the Hendricks barn. Yes, there had been other incidents. The courtroom erupted. Grant stood, his face cold with rage. You'd take the word of a criminal trying to save his own neck. I'd take the word of multiple witnesses and evidence, Judge Harrison said firmly. Mr. Grant, you're under arrest for conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. What happened next was chaos. Grant's remaining men went for their guns. Jacob shoved Clara down as bullets flew. The church became a battlefield with ranchers and Grant's hired guns exchanging fire. When the smoke cleared, Grant was on the ground, blood spreading from a wound in his shoulder. His men were either dead or fleeing. And standing over him, gun still aimed, was Jacob McKenna. "You took everything from me once," Jacob said quietly. "You won't do it again." For a moment, Clara thought he might shoot. Then Jacob lowered the gun and turned away. "He's not worth it. Let the law have him." As Grant was taken away, cursing and threatening, Jacob found Clara in the crowd. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms in full view of everyone. "It's over," he said against her hair. "Is it?" Clara asked, pulling back to look at him. "Grant's part is, but something else is just beginning." He cupped her face in his hands. "I've been dead for 4 years, Clara. You brought me back to life. I know I'm not what you deserve." Clara silenced him with a kiss there in front of the whole town, not caring who saw or what they thought. When they finally parted, both breathless, she said, "You're exactly what I deserve, and I'm exactly what you need." The crowd's reaction to their kiss was mixed. Some gasped, others smiled knowingly, and a few of the older women nodded with satisfaction, as if they'd seen this coming all along. Mrs. Henderson was already whispering furiously to her neighbor, no doubt calculating how quickly she could spread this latest development. But Jacob and Clara were oblivious to it all, lost in the moment of finally acknowledging what had been building between them for months. It was Tom Hendricks who broke the spell, clearing his throat loudly. "Well, I reckon we should let the judge finish his business. There's still the matter of sorting out Grant's other crimes." Judge Harrison, who had maintained his composure throughout the gunfight, with remarkable aplomb stood and brushed dust from his robes. "Indeed, Mr. Grant will be transported to Austin for trial. I'll need sworn statements from everyone involved. Miss Whitmore, I'll need to speak with you particularly about the events in Austin as well." Clara stiffened, but Jacob's hand found hers squeezing gently. "Whatever happened in Austin?" "Your Honor." Miss Whitmore was clearly the victim, not the perpetrator. The judge studied Clara with shrewd eyes. "I suspected as much when I heard James Worthington was involved. This isn't the first complaint about that young man, though it's the first where the woman survived to tell about it. Miss Whitmore, would you be willing to testify against him?" "Yes," Clara said without hesitation. "If it means stopping him from hurting anyone else, yes." "Good. I'll have the Austin authorities re-examine the case. In the meantime, you're free to remain here. It seems you've found yourself a good situation." As the crowd began to disperse, Miguel approached, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Senor Jacob, Senorita Clara, the ranch is secure. The men who stood guard are asking if you need them to stay." "Thank them, but no," Jacob said. "The danger has passed, but tell them we won't forget what they did for us." The walk back to Ironwood felt different somehow. The threat that had hung over them was gone, but in its place was a new tension, an awareness that everything between them had changed. They walked in silence until they reached the gates. Then Jacob stopped, turning to face Clara. "I need to say something," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "What happened back there? The kiss?" "Are you about to apologize?" Clara interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Because if you are, I might have to shoot you myself." Despite everything, Jacob laughed, a real laugh, full and rich. "No, not apologize, never that. But I need you to understand what you're getting into. I'm not whole, Clara. Parts of me died with Sarah and Thomas. I don't know if I can be the man you deserve." Clara reached up, touching his face gently. "I'm not asking you to be whole, Jacob. I'm not whole either. We're both carrying pieces of the past that will never fully heal. But maybe together our broken pieces can make something new, something different, but still good." "Sarah," he started, then stopped, struggling with the words. "Sarah loved you," Clara said firmly. "From everything you've told me, everything I've read in her journal, she loved you completely. She wouldn't want you to die with her, Jacob. She'd want you to live to love again, to be happy. How do you know that? Because that's what love is. It's wanting the best for someone even when you're not there to see it." Clara's voice caught slightly. "My mother told me that before she died. She said the greatest gift we can give those we've lost is to live fully in their honor. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the ranch spreading out behind them, testament to dreams both lost and potentially found again. Finally, Jacob took her hand, linking their fingers together. "Stay with me," he said simply. "Not as my housekeeper, as mine." "I was already yours," Clara admitted. "From the moment you handed me that carved bird. Maybe even before." They entered the house together, and it felt different now, not a monument to grief, but a home with possibilities. Clara went to start dinner while Jacob tended to the evening chores, but there was a new ease between them, glances that lingered, casual touches as they passed in the hallway. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Jacob brought out Sarah's journal again. "I want to read you something," he said, flipping to a marked page. "Sarah wrote this about a month before she died." He read aloud, "I dreamed again last night, but this time it wasn't frightening. I saw Jacob standing in our kitchen laughing with a dark-haired woman. She was cooking something that smelled of cinnamon, and he was looking at her the way he used to look at me, like she was his whole world. I woke up crying not from sadness, but from relief. If something happens to me, I want him to find that. I want him to find her." Clara felt tears running down her cheeks. "She saw me, maybe," Jacob said softly. "Or maybe she just knew I'd need someone strong enough to bring me back from the darkness. Either way, I think she'd approve." Over the next weeks, the town adjusted to the new reality. With Grant gone, he'd been sentenced to 20 years for his crimes. Several of his properties were put up for sale. The ranchers he'd driven out were able to reclaim their lands, and a new sense of community flourished. Jacob emerged from his isolation, taking an active role in town meetings and helping neighbors with their rebuilds. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Some of Grant's men had escaped, and there were rumors they were regrouping, planning revenge. One night, Clara woke to find Jacob gone from his chair by the fire. They hadn't yet taken the step of sharing a bed, both still navigating the proprieties of their unusual courtship. She found him on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. "What is it?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Maybe nothing. Thought I saw movement by the barn." Clara fetched her own rifle, taking position at the other end of the porch. They waited in tense silence until dawn revealed nothing more threatening than a few spooked deer. But the incident reminded them that their victory over Grant didn't mean they were safe from all threats. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed woman stepped down from the stage, her bearing regal despite the dust of travel. Clara was in town picking up supplies when she saw her and felt an instant recognition that made her blood run cold. Margaret Worthington James's mother. The older woman spotted Clara at the same moment, her lips thinning with displeasure. She approached with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Miss Whitmore, I should have known you'd surface eventually." "Mrs. Worthington," Clara said evenly, though her heart was racing. "What brings you to Redstone?" "You do, unfortunately. Judge Harrison's investigation has created complications for my family. James is facing charges largely based on your accusations." "They're not accusations if they're true." Margaret's eyes flashed. "You always were too bold for your own good, but I'm not here to debate. I'm here to offer you a deal. $20,000 to disappear, leave Texas entirely, never testify against my son." Clara laughed, surprising herself with how free it sounded. "You still think you can buy your way out of everything, don't you?" "Everyone has a price, Miss Whitmore." "Maybe, but you can't afford mine." Clara turned to leave, but Margaret's next words stopped her. "I know about your situation here, living with that McKenna man unchaperoned. It wouldn't take much to destroy this new life you've built." "You're right," Clara said, turning back with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It wouldn't take much, which is why I'm not going to let you. See, Mrs. Worthington, the difference between Redstone and Austin is that people here know me. They know my character, and they know that powerful people sometimes lie to protect their own." Before Margaret could respond, Jacob appeared, having apparently witnessed the confrontation from across the street. He moved to Clara's side with the protective instinct of a wolf guarding its mate. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. Margaret looked him up and down dismissively. "You must be McKenna. I've heard about you. War hero turned hermit. Interesting choice for a protector, Miss Whitmore. The only choice, Clara said firmly. Mrs. Worthington was just leaving, weren't you? This isn't over, Margaret said coldly. You'll regret crossing my family. I regret not stopping your son sooner, Clara replied. How many other girls suffered because I stayed quiet at first? That's my only regret. As Margaret swept away toward the hotel, Jacob put his arm around Clara's shoulders. You all right? Better than all right, I just stood up to my past and didn't flinch. But Margaret Worthington wasn't done. Over the next few days, she spread poison throughout the town, questioning Clara's virtue, suggesting improprieties hinting at scandals. Some people listened, especially those who had benefited from Grant's reign and resented the changes. It came to a head at Sunday service. Reverend Mills, an older man who usually preached about forgiveness and community, seemed uncomfortable as he began his sermon. We must be mindful of propriety, he began, his eyes finding Clara and Jacob in their pew. When we allow immoral behavior to flourish, we corrupt our entire community. Clara felt Jacob tense beside her, but before he could react, Betty Miller stood up. Excuse me, Reverend, but are you calling Miss Clara immoral? The woman who stood up to armed men who helped bring down Silas Grant, who's done nothing but help this town. Sit down, young lady, her mother hissed, but Betty remained standing. No, Mama, this isn't right. We all know what this is about. That fancy lady from Austin has been spreading lies because Miss Clara told the truth about her son. Tom Hendricks stood next. The girl's right. Clara Whitmore has shown more courage and integrity than most of us. If there's impropriety, it's in listening to gossip from strangers over evidence from our own eyes. One by one, people throughout the church stood in support. Even Mrs. Henderson, the town gossip, rose to her feet. I've watched that ranch for months, she announced. And I can tell you that Miss Clara has conducted herself properly. Can't say the same for Mrs. Worthington, who tried to bribe me yesterday to spread rumors. The Reverend, looking increasingly flustered, tried to regain control. This is highly irregular. So is attacking innocent people from the pulpit, Jacob said, standing slowly. His voice was quiet, but carried throughout the church. Reverend, with respect, you're new here. You didn't see Clara face down armed men. You didn't see her organize this community against tyranny. You didn't see her bring life back to a house that had become a tomb. If you want to preach about morality, perhaps start with the courage to stand for truth over comfortable lies. He took Clara's hand, helping her to her feet. And for the record, I've asked Miss Whitmore to marry me. She hasn't answered yet, but when she does, I hope you'll be willing to perform the ceremony. If not, we'll find someone who values character over gossip. The church erupted in surprised exclamations. Clara stared at Jacob in shock. This wasn't how she'd imagined a proposal. But then again, nothing about their relationship had been conventional. You haven't asked me to marry you, she whispered. I'm asking now, Jacob said, turning to face her, fully apparently oblivious to their audience. Clara Whitmore, you saved my life in every way that matters. Will you marry me? Clara looked around the church at the faces watching them, some supportive, some skeptical, all waiting. Then she looked back at Jacob, this man who'd lost everything and found the courage to risk his heart again. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. The church erupted again, this time in celebration. Margaret Worthington, who'd been watching from the back, turned and left without a word. She was on the next stage out of town, her threats empty in the face of a community that had chosen its own over an outsider's lies. But happiness, Clara had learned, was often followed by hardship. 2 weeks later, as wedding preparations were underway, disaster struck. Jacob had gone to Austin to finalize some legal matters regarding Grant's prosecution. He was supposed to return in 3 days. A week passed with no word. Clara tried not to panic. Travel could be unpredictable. But when Miguel rode to Austin to investigate and returned with troubling news, her composure cracked. Senor Jacob never made it to Austin, Miguel reported. His horse was found abandoned on the road. There was blood. The search that followed consumed the entire town. Every able-bodied man rode out, scouring the countryside. Clara insisted on joining them, refusing to sit idle while Jacob was missing. It was Ben Cooper who found the first real clue tracks leading off the main road toward an abandoned mine shaft. The tracks were days old, but they were something. The mine was a day's ride north in rough country that had been largely abandoned since the silver played out. As they approached, Clara's heart sank. If Jacob had been taken there, if he'd been thrown down a shaft. But smoke rising from what should have been an empty building gave her hope. They approached carefully, weapons ready. Through a broken window, Clara could see inside, and her heart nearly stopped. Jacob was there tied to a chair, clearly beaten, but alive. Around him were 4 men, including one she recognized. Scarface. The man who'd escaped the night of the attack on Ironwood. "We go in fast," Tom Hendricks whispered. "Take them by surprise." "No," Clara said. "They'll kill him before we get close. I have a better idea." Before anyone could stop her, she walked directly toward the building, hands raised. "Hello in there. I want to make a deal." The men inside scrambled for positions, one putting a gun to Jacob's head. Scarface appeared in the doorway, grinning unpleasantly. "Well, well, come to save your man. Come to offer you what you really want," Clara said steadily. "Me. Let him go and I'll come with you. No fight, no resistance." "Clara, no." Jacob's voice was hoarse but desperate. "Interesting offer," Scarface mused. "But why would we trade when we can have both?" "Because you're surrounded," Clara said calmly. "Every rancher in the county is out there. You kill him, you die. Take me instead and you might make it out alive." It was a bluff. They only had 8 men, but Scarface didn't know that. He looked around nervously, calculating odds. "Here's what's going to happen," Clara continued, moving closer. "You're going to untie him and let him walk out. Once he's clear, I'll come in. You can use me as a hostage to get safe passage." "Clara, don't do this," Jacob pleaded. She met his eyes, trying to convey everything she couldn't say aloud. "Trust me. I love you. This isn't the end." Scarface made his decision. "Cut him loose," he ordered one of his men. As Jacob stumbled to his feet, Clara moved past him. Their hands brushed for just a moment, and she pressed something into his palm, the small pistol from her pocket. Jacob understood immediately. As soon as he was clear of the doorway, he spun firing through the window. Clara dropped to the floor as bullets flew over her head. The ranchers charged from their positions, and the fight was brief but vicious. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the kidnappers were dead. Scarface was wounded, bleeding from a shot to the shoulder. Clara crawled to where Jacob had fallen, his own wound reopened in the fight. "You brave, foolish woman," he gasped, pulling her against him despite the pain. "You're one to talk," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you ever disappear on me again." "Never," he promised. "Never again." The ride back to town was slow, with Jacob barely conscious from blood loss. The doctor worked through the night to save him, and for hours Clara sat by his bedside, holding his hand and praying to whatever power might be listening. When he finally woke, the first word from his lips was her name. "I'm here," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "I'm right here." "The wedding," he mumbled. "Did we miss the wedding?" Clara laughed through her tears. "It can wait until you're healed." "No," Jacob said with surprising firmness. "No more waiting. I've wasted too much time already. As soon as I can stand, we're getting married." 2 weeks later, he made good on that promise. The wedding was held at Ironwood in the garden Clara had restored. The entire town attended, even Reverend Mills, who had apologized for his earlier judgment. Clara wore Sarah's wedding dress, which Jacob had kept preserved in tissue paper. It had been his idea, his way of honoring the past while embracing the future. "She would want you to have it," he'd said simply, and Clara had cried at the generosity of the gesture. As they stood before the assembled crowd exchanging vows, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate woman taking a job nobody wanted. A broken man hiding from the world. Somehow they'd saved each other. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "Through darkness and light, through plenty and want, through all the battles yet to fight. I promise to love you with whatever pieces of my heart remain whole," Jacob replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "And to let you help me heal the rest. You brought me back to life, Clara. Now that life is yours always." When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. As Jacob kissed his bride, someone shouted, "About time!" And everyone laughed. The celebration that followed was like nothing Redstone had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by neighbors. Musicians played late into the night. Even Margaret Worthington's attempts to cause trouble had ultimately failed. James had been convicted in Austin, and the family's reputation was in ruins. As the party continued around them, Jacob pulled Clara aside, leading her to the hill overlooking the ranch. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Clara opened it to find a carved wooden box, intricate and beautiful. Inside was her mother's brooch, which she'd sold weeks ago to buy medicine when Jacob was hurt. "How did you—" Miguel tracked it down. A woman shouldn't have to sell her mother's memory to save her future husband. He pinned it to her dress with gentle fingers. "Sarah had jewelry, lots of it. It's yours now if you want it. But I thought you should have this back first." Clara touched the brooch, then reached up to cup his face. "How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Jacob said seriously. "I think Sarah sent you. I think somehow she knew I'd need you." Or maybe, Clara suggested, two broken people just recognized each other and decided to build something new from the pieces. They stood there on the hill, looking out over land that had seen so much sorrow, but now held so much promise. In the distance, they could hear the music and laughter from their wedding celebration, but for this moment, they were alone, two souls who'd found each other against all odds. "What now?" Clara asked, leaning into his embrace. "Now we live," Jacob said simply. "We work the ranch. We raise children if we're blessed with them. We help our neighbors. We face whatever comes together." "Together," Clara agreed. "I like the sound of that." As they walked back to their wedding celebration, hand in hand, Clara reflected on the sign that had hung in Garrett's store for 3 years. The job nobody wanted had become the life she'd never dared to dream of. The months that followed brought both challenges and joys. Clara discovered she was pregnant just as a drought threatened the county's crops. While Jacob and the other ranchers worked to dig new wells and share water resources, Clara organized the women to preserve what food they could and plan for lean times ahead. It was during one of these planning meetings that an unexpected visitor arrived. A young woman barely 17 stood at the door of Ironwood with a baby in her arms and desperation in her eyes. "Please," she said to Clara, "I heard about you. How you stood up to powerful men. I need help." The girl's story was painfully familiar. A wealthy man's son promises of marriage, then abandonment when she became pregnant. Now her family had cast her out, and she had nowhere to go. Clara didn't hesitate. "You'll stay here. We'll figure something out." Jacob, when told of their new house guest, simply nodded. "If you trust her, that's enough for me." The girl Anna proved to be a hard worker and devoted mother. She helped Clara with the household duties, especially as Clara's pregnancy advanced. And when Clara went into labor during a terrible storm that prevented the doctor from reaching them, it was Anna who served as midwife with surprising skill. "I helped my mother deliver babies back home," Anna explained as she guided Clara through the pain, "before I became a shame to the family." "You're not a shame," Clara gasped between contractions. "You're a survivor. There's a difference." When Clara's son was born healthy and loud and perfect, Jacob wept openly as he held the tiny bundle. "We'll name him Thomas," he said softly. "If that's all right with you, not as replacement, but as honor. New life carrying forward the memory of what was lost." "Thomas it is," Clara agreed, exhausted but happy. The drought eventually broke, and with it came a new prosperity to the region. The community that had banded together against Grant remained strong, helping each other through good times and bad. Ironwood became known as a place of refuge for women like Anna, who needed shelter for cowboys down on their luck, for anyone who needed a second chance. 5 years passed. Clara gave Jacob 2 more children. Sarah, named for the woman whose memory they both honored, and James, a name Clara chose to reclaim from the man who'd tried to destroy her. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with children's laughter. Anna had married Miguel's nephew, a good man who loved her daughter as his own. They built a small house on Ironwood land close enough to help, but far enough for privacy. One evening, as Clara stood on the porch watching Jacob teach young Thomas to ride, she felt a presence beside her. Not ghostly, just peaceful. She thought of Sarah, of the woman whose death had created the void Clara had filled. Not replaced, never replaced, but honored through the continuation of life and love. "Thank you," she whispered to the evening air. Whether she was thanking Sarah God or fate itself, she wasn't sure, but gratitude filled her heart. Jacob dismounted and walked toward her, Thomas riding proudly on his shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "How different life is from what we plan," Clara said. "I came here running from scandal, desperate for any job. You were hiding from the world, convinced you'd never feel again. And now we have this." Clara gestured to their children playing in the yard, to the ranch thriving around them, to the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate griefs. Jacob set Thomas down to play with his sisters and pulled Clara into his arms. "Do you ever regret it? Taking that job nobody wanted?" Clara smiled, thinking of that yellowed notice that had hung on the wall for 3 years, waiting for someone desperate enough or brave enough to answer it. "Never. It was the best decision I ever made. Even with all the danger, Grant, the kidnappers, the threats, especially because of those, they taught me I was stronger than I knew. They taught us both that together we could face anything." As the sun set over Ironwood Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of terror, grief, and doubt. But there had also been love, community, and the gradual healing that comes from refusing to give up. The job nobody wanted had become a life worth fighting for. And fight for it they had against external threats and internal demons, against the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Now as she stood in the circle of her husband's arms, watching their children play in the yard of the home they'd reclaimed from sorrow, Clara knew with certainty that every struggle had been worth it. She'd found more than employment at Ironwood Ranch. She'd found family purpose and a love that had grown from the ashes of loss into something beautiful and enduring. The woman who'd arrived in Redstone with nothing but a tarnished brooch and desperation had become someone she hardly recognized, wife, mother, pillar of the community. But underneath it all, she was still Clara Whitmore McKenna, the woman who dared to take the job nobody wanted, and in doing so had found everything she'd never known she needed. The years of peace had softened them all, perhaps too much. That became clear the autumn morning when Clara spotted dust clouds on the horizon far too large to be casual travelers. She was hanging laundry with Anna while the children played nearby, and something about the purposeful movement of those riders made her skin prickle with familiar dread. "Anna, take the children inside," she said quietly, her hand already moving to the rifle they kept by the door. "Now." Anna didn't question it. 5 years at Ironwood had taught her to recognize danger in Clara's tone. She gathered the children quickly, hushing their protests with promises of cookies and stories. Jacob was in the north pasture with Miguel, and the hands too far to signal quickly. Clara rang the bell they'd installed after the Grant trouble's 3 sharp clangs meant danger come armed. Then she positioned herself on the porch, rifle visible but not raised, and waited. The riders numbered at least 20, all armed, all wearing matching dark dusters that gave them an official air. But it was the man leading them that made Clara's blood run cold. Marcus Worthington, James's younger brother, had his older sibling's cruel eyes, but carried himself with military precision that James had never possessed. "Mrs. McKenna," he said, touching his hat brim with mocking courtesy as he reined in his horse at the porch steps. "Or should I still call you Miss Whitmore, since your marriage might not be entirely legal?" "My marriage is perfectly legal, Mr. Worthington. State your business and get off my land." Marcus smiled a cold expression that reminded her painfully of his mother. "Actually, that's what we're here to discuss. The land. You see, there's been a development regarding the original Spanish land grant for this area. Turns out Ironwood Ranch may not have clear title after all." Clara kept her expression steady, though her heart was racing. "This ranch has been in the McKenna family for 15 years. The title is clear." "Is it?" Marcus produced a leather portfolio from his saddlebag. "I have documents here suggesting otherwise. Old documents recently discovered in the Spanish archives in San Antonio. They indicate this land was granted to the Valdez family, never legally sold. which would make your husband a squatter. Convenient timing for such a discovery, Clara said dryly. Just when your family needs to restore its reputation after your brother's conviction. Marcus's face darkened. My brother was railroaded by a vindictive woman who couldn't accept her place, but that's water under the bridge. I'm here as a legitimate businessman representing the Valdez heirs who want their land back. The sound of approaching horses announced Jacob's arrival. He and Miguel rode hard into the yard, followed by their ranch hands, all armed. Jacob dismounted and climbed the porch steps to stand beside Clara, his presence solid and reassuring. Worthington, he said coldly. You've got 30 seconds to explain why you're threatening my family. Marcus repeated his claim about the Spanish land grant, adding more details that sounded plausible enough to be genuinely concerning. According to him, the Valdez family had never legally transferred the land, making every subsequent sale invalid. Even if that were true, Jacob said, adverse possession laws would protect us. We've held and improved this land for 15 years. Ah, but you abandoned it for nearly 4 years after your first wife's death, Marcus countered. The place was barely maintained, hardly occupied. That breaks the continuous possession requirement. Clara felt Jacob tense beside her. Those years of grief were still a sensitive wound, and Marcus was deliberately prodding it. The ranch was never abandoned, Miguel spoke up unexpectedly. I lived here the entire time, maintained the property, have the records to prove it. Marcus's eyes flicked dismissively over Miguel. The testimony of a Mexican ranch hand won't hold much weight in court, I'm afraid. The testimony of an honest man holds weight with honest people, Clara said sharply. Though I understand why you might not recognize that concept. Marcus's controlled facade cracked slightly. You should be careful, Mrs. McKenna. Your husband isn't the only one with a questionable past. I've done some research on you as well. Did you know there was a girl in Austin before you worked for our family? A seamstress who died under mysterious circumstances. Some say you were the last person to see her alive. Clara's blood ran cold. Emily. Poor Emily, who had taken her own life rather than bear the shame of what James Worthington had done to her. Clara had tried to help her, had been with her that last night trying to talk her out of her desperate decision. She'd failed and the guilt still haunted her. How dare you? She whispered, her voice shaking with rage. I dare because I have witness statements, Marcus said smoothly. People willing to testify that you were involved in that poor girl's death. Combined with the accusations against you regarding my brother, it paints quite a picture. The kind of picture that could see you hanged. Jacob's hand went to his gun, but Clara caught his wrist. No, that's what he wants. An excuse to have you arrested, leave me vulnerable. Smart woman, Marcus said approvingly. Here's my offer. You have 30 days to vacate Ironwood Ranch. Leave peacefully and all these unfortunate questions about your past go away. Fight me and I'll destroy you both. Your children will grow up as orphans knowing their parents died as criminals. Get out, Jacob said, his voice deadly quiet. Get out now before I forget there are children watching from that window. Marcus looked up, saw small faces pressed against the glass and smiled coldly. Pretty children. Be a shame for them to lose everything because their parents were too proud to accept reality. He turned his horse around. 30 days McKenna. Use them wisely. As the riders departed, Clara sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. Emily's face haunted her memory, so young, so broken, so desperate. Clara had tried to save her, but sometimes trying wasn't enough. Clara. Jacob knelt beside her. His face creased with concern. What he said about the girl in Austin, her name was Emily, Clara said quietly. She was 16. James Worthington raped her repeatedly over 3 months. When she found out she was pregnant, she came to me for help. I tried to get her to go to the authorities, offered to go with her to testify. But she was too frightened. That night Clara's voice broke. She drank lye. I held her while she died. She begged me not to let them call her a whore at her funeral. Jacob pulled her into his arms as she wept, years of suppressed grief finally breaking free. It wasn't your fault. I should have done more, should have killed James myself when I had the chance. Then you'd have hanged and he'd have gone on hurting girls, Jacob said firmly. You did what you could. Marcus is twisting tragedy to serve his purposes just like his brother did. That evening, after the children were asleep, they held a war council in the kitchen. Miguel Ana and her husband Roberto and Ben Cooper, who'd ridden over as soon as he heard about the morning's confrontation. The Spanish land grant claim might have merit, Ben said reluctantly. There was a Valdez family that had holdings in this area before Texas independence. Most of their grants were honored, but some fell through the cracks. But we bought this land legally, Jacob protested. I have the deed. From someone who might not have had the right to sell it, Ben pointed out. If Worthington really has found documents can be forged, Clara said. The Worthingtons have money and connections. They could manufacture whatever evidence they need. Then we need to find the real documents, Miguel said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. My grandfather knew the Valdez family. They didn't disappear. They sold their holdings legally and moved to California during the gold rush. The records would be in the old mission archives in San Antonio. Then we go to San Antonio, Clara said immediately. You can't, Anna said. If you leave, Marcus will claim you're fleeing. He might move in while you're gone. Then I'll go, Roberto offered. I know the mission speaks Spanish. I can find what we need. While Roberto prepared for his journey, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. Marcus Worthington hadn't come all this way just for revenge. There had to be more to it. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson arrived 2 days later, her usual gossipy demeanor replaced by genuine concern. I thought you should know, she said, accepting Clara's offer of coffee with unusual gravity. There's been talk in town. Marcus Worthington isn't just after your ranch. He's buying up everything he can. The old Grant properties, the abandoned mines to the north. He's even made offers on active ranches. Why? Jacob asked. What's he planning? Railroad, Mrs. Henderson said simply. The Southern Pacific is planning a spur line through the county. Whoever controls the land controls where it goes, and the depot location will make someone very rich. Clara and Jacob exchanged glances. It suddenly made sense. Ironwood sat at the perfect junction point for a railroad depot with water access and flat land suitable for development. So this isn't about revenge, Clara said slowly. Or rather, not just about revenge. It's about money. It's always about money with men like that, Mrs. Henderson said with unusual wisdom. The revenge is just a bonus for them. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching the moonlit landscape when she heard footsteps behind her. But it wasn't Jacob, it was young Thomas rubbing sleepy eyes. Mama, are the bad men going to take our home? Clara knelt down, pulling her son close. Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Papa says you're the bravest person he knows, Thomas said solemnly. He says you saved him. We saved each other, Clara corrected gently. That's what families do. After Thomas went back to bed, Clara made a decision. She wouldn't wait for Marcus to make the next move. At dawn, she saddled her horse, told Jacob she was going to town for supplies, and rode straight to the telegraph office. The message she sent was simple but costly. Going all the way to Austin. Need complete records. James Worthington Activities, 1869 to 1874, will pay well for information, especially interested in Emily Patterson case. The telegraph operator, old Sam Hughes, looked at her curiously, but sent the message without comment. Clara had learned that sometimes the best defense was a good offense, and if Marcus wanted to dig up the past, she'd dig deeper. The response came faster than expected. Within 3 days, a package arrived from Austin containing police reports, witness statements, and most damning, a letter in James Worthington's own hand admitting to indiscretions with household staff. The sender was anonymous, but a note suggested looking into Marcus's own past, particularly his time at university. Clara shared the information with Jacob, who whistled low. This is enough to destroy Marcus if he pushes the Emily situation. But it doesn't solve the land grant problem, Clara pointed out. We need Roberto to find those documents. Roberto had been gone a week when trouble escalated. Clara was at the general store when she overheard 2 of Marcus's men talking. They didn't see her behind the fabric bolts, and their conversation chilled her blood. Tomorrow night, one said, during the church social, the house will be empty. What about the Mexican and his family? They'll be handled. Boss says make it look like raiders, no witnesses. Clara slipped out the back and rode hard for home. They had to act fast. That evening, she and Jacob developed a plan. They would appear to go to the church social as expected, but Miguel and Roberto would be waiting in ambush. "It's too dangerous," Jacob protested. "We should get the sheriff." "Sheriff Watson is new since Grant's time, but he's still just one man," Clara pointed out. "And we don't know if Marcus has gotten to him. We handle this ourselves." The next night, they made a show of leaving for town, the whole family dressed in their best. But once out of sight of any watchers, they circled back through the canyon. Miguel and Roberto, who had returned that very day with crucial documents, were already in position. The attack came just after full dark. 8 men approached the seemingly empty house, moving with the confidence of those expecting no resistance. They were met with a storm of gunfire from multiple positions. The battle was fierce, but brief. Clara, stationed in the hayloft with a clear view of the approach, proved to be deadly accurate. Her months of practice had paid off, and she dropped 2 riders before they even knew where the shots were coming from. When the smoke cleared, 5 attackers were dead, 2 wounded, and 1 had fled. Among the wounded was the scarred man who'd attacked Clara before the one who'd escaped justice during the Grant troubles. "Twice you've come for me," Clara said, standing over him with her rifle trained on his chest. "There won't be a third time. You can't prove Worthington sent us—" He gasped, blood seeping through his fingers where he held his side. "Maybe not," Clara agreed. "But I can prove you're wanted for the attempted murder from 5 years ago. That's enough to see you hang." Sheriff Watson arrived with remarkable speed. Someone in town had heard the gunshots and alerted him. To Clara's relief, he seemed genuinely interested in justice rather than politics. "This is clear self-defense," he said after taking statements. "These men attacked your home, but proving Worthington ordered it will be harder." "We might not need to," Roberto said, producing the documents from San Antonio. These proved the Valdez family sold their land legally to Jacob's predecessor. The sale was registered with the Mexican government before Texas independence and honored by the Republic of Texas afterward. Worthington's claim is fraudulent. The sheriff examined the documents carefully. "These look legitimate, but Worthington will challenge them in court." "Let him," Clara said firmly. "We have the truth on our side." The court battle that followed was intense. Marcus brought in expensive lawyers from Dallas, experts in land law, even a professor who claimed expertise in Spanish colonial documents. But Clara and Jacob had something better: the actual truth supported by genuine documents and testimony from multiple witnesses. The turning point came when Clara took the stand. Marcus's lawyer tried to attack her character, bringing up Emily Patterson's death, the scandal with James Worthington, her questionable relationship with Jacob before their marriage. Clara remained calm through it all, then produced the evidence she'd gathered about James. "If we're discussing character, she said clearly, perhaps the court should know that James Worthington assaulted at least 7 women that we can document. Emily Patterson took her own life rather than bear his child. I tried to save her and failed. If that makes me a criminal, then I accept that judgment. But I will not be silent while another Worthington tries to destroy innocent lives for profit." She then produced evidence of Marcus's own crimes: embezzlement at university, a covered-up assault on a fellow student, bribes paid to officials in San Antonio to forge the land grant documents. Marcus's face went white as she laid out document after document. "Where did you get those?" "From people who were tired of being afraid of your family," Clara replied. "You thought your money and name would protect you forever. You were wrong." The judge's ruling was decisive. Not only was the Worthington claim to Ironwood dismissed, but Marcus was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. As they left the courthouse, Jacob took Clara's hand. "You did it. You saved our home again." "We did it," Clara corrected. "All of us together." The ride home was triumphant, with neighbors joining them along the way, turning it into an impromptu parade. By the time they reached Ironwood, half the county was there to celebrate. But Clara noticed Jacob growing quiet as the evening wore on. She found him standing at Sarah and Thomas's graves, hat in hand. "She would be proud," Clara said softly, joining him. "You protected what she loved." "I was thinking," Jacob said slowly, "about how different life might have been if she'd lived, if our son had lived. Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy now, for loving you and our children when they're gone." Clara slipped her hand into his. "Love isn't finite, Jacob. Loving us doesn't diminish what you felt for them. The heart expands." Sarah understood that she wrote about it in her journal, remember? About wanting you to find happiness if something happened to her. "How did you become so wise?" Jacob asked, pulling her close. "By learning from loss," Claire replied. "By understanding that grief and joy can coexist, that the past shapes us, but doesn't have to define us." As they stood there in the fading light, their children's laughter carrying from the house where neighbors still celebrated, Clara reflected on the strange paths that had led them here. A job nobody wanted had become a life worth fighting for again and again, against different enemies, but always with the same determination. The railroad did come through Redstone eventually, though. Without Marcus Worthington's influence, the depot was placed in a location that benefited the whole community rather than a single landowner. Ironwood Ranch prospered, becoming one of the largest cattle operations in the county. Anna's daughter grew up alongside Clara's children, the scandal of her birth forgotten in the face of her obvious intelligence and charm. She would eventually become the first woman from Redstone to attend university, inspired by Clara's example of female strength and determination. Miguel, who had been so instrumental in saving the ranch multiple times, was made a full partner in the operation, a scandalous decision in some circles, but one that Jacob and Clara never regretted. His knowledge and loyalty had proven invaluable. Years later, when Clara's hair had turned silver and Jacob's face bore the lines of decades spent working under the Texas sun, they would sit on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where they'd fought desperately to preserve their home. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob would ask occasionally. "The violence, the struggle, all the battles we had to fight." "No," Clara would answer, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. "Every fight taught us we were stronger than we knew. Every battle proved that what we were building was worth protecting." One evening, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, surrounded by family and friends, young Thomas, now a man grown with a family of his own, raised a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering, "who taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to stand firm despite it. Who showed us that love can bloom in the most unlikely ground, and who proved that sometimes the job nobody wants becomes the life everyone envies." Clara felt tears on her cheeks as the crowd cheered. She looked at Jacob, seeing in his weathered face the young widower who'd hired her so many years ago, the fighter who'd stood beside her against all threats, the father who'd raised their children with gentle strength, the partner who'd helped her build something extraordinary from the ashes of their separate griefs. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, for her ears alone. "Not one," she replied, raising her glass to touch his. "I'd take that unwanted job again, in a heartbeat." As the celebration continued around them, Clara thought about the young woman who'd stood in Garrett's general store all those years ago, desperate enough to take any position, brave enough to walk into a house of grief. She couldn't have imagined then where that decision would lead, through danger and triumph, sorrow and joy, building a legacy that would endure for generations. The job nobody wanted had required courage she didn't know she possessed, had demanded she face not just external enemies, but her own fears and past trauma. It had brought her love when she'd only sought survival family, when she'd expected only employment and a home, when she'd been prepared for merely shelter. Marcus Worthington's attack had been the last serious threat to Ironwood Ranch, though life continued to bring its challenges, droughts and floods, market crashes and cattle diseases. But Clara and Jacob faced each crisis together, their bond strengthened by every trial they'd weathered. When Clara finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, her last words were to Jacob, "Thank you for giving me that job." Jacob lived another 3 years, long enough to see their grandson take over the ranch operations, to watch their granddaughter become the first female judge in the county, to know that what they'd built would endure. At his funeral, the entire county turned out. The Reverend read from Sarah's journal the passage about her dream of Jacob finding happiness again, and from Clara's own writings discovered after her death about the courage required to build new life from old sorrow. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from old Pete Garrett's son, who now ran the general store. He hung a new notice on the wall, this time framed in gold, Here once hung a help-wanted notice that changed the history of our county. Clara Whitmore answered that call in 1871, and in doing so taught us all that the greatest opportunities often come disguised as impossible situations. Below it, he added a quote from Clara herself, taken from a letter she'd written to Anna years before. "We cannot choose the trials life sends our way, but we can choose whether to face them with courage or cowardice, whether to stand alone or together, whether to let grief define us or to build something beautiful despite it." The legacy of Ironwood Ranch lived on, but more than that, the legacy of a woman who'd refused to be broken by scandal, who'd stood against powerful men who'd chosen love over fear, and who'd proven that sometimes the job nobody wants is exactly the one that will save your life. In the end, Clara Whitmore McKenna's story became legend in that part of Texas, told and retold, each generation adding their own understanding to the tale. But at its heart, it remained simple: a desperate woman, a grieving man, and the courage to build something extraordinary from the ashes of their separate losses. The job nobody wanted had become the life everybody remembered. The years that followed Marcus Worthington's defeat should have been peaceful, but Clara had learned that peace was often just the pause between storms. She was 43 now, her dark hair streaked with premature silver from the trials she'd endured, but her spirit remained unbroken. It was a Sunday morning in late spring when she first noticed the strange behavior in town, hushed conversations that stopped when she approached, worried glances exchanged between neighbors who'd been friends for decades. "Something's coming," she told Jacob that evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 18 now, tall and strong, like his father, while Sarah at 16 had her mother's sharp intelligence and fierce determination. Young James, just 14, possessed a gentle soul that reminded Clara painfully of Emily Patterson, the girl she'd failed to save so many years ago. Jacob nodded slowly, his own instincts alert to the undercurrent of tension. Ben Cooper mentioned something about federal marshals asking questions in San Antonio, something about old war crimes. Clara's blood chilled. They'd thought that particular ghost was buried with Silas Grant's imprisonment and Marcus Worthington's downfall, but the past she'd learned had a way of clawing its way back to the surface. The truth revealed itself 3 days later when a contingent of federal officers arrived in Redstone, led by a man whose very presence seemed to darken the air around him. Colonel William Bradshaw was everything Clara instinctively distrusted. Smooth, polished, with eyes like a snake's, and a smile that never reached them. "Mr. McKenna," Bradshaw said, dismounting in front of the house, with theatrical precision. "I'm here on official business regarding certain incidents during the war, specifically the execution of 3 Confederate soldiers under your command." "Those men were raiders attacking civilians," Jacob said evenly, though Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "They'd already killed 2 families, including children." "So you say," Bradshaw replied smoothly. "But new evidence has come to light, suggesting they were actually legitimate soldiers on a sanctioned mission, and you killed them to cover up your own crimes, specifically the theft of Confederate gold meant for civilian relief." Clara stepped forward, her voice sharp. "That's absurd. My husband served with honor." Bradshaw's reptilian gaze shifted to her. The infamous Clara McKenna. Yes, I've heard about you. The woman with quite a checkered past herself. Tell me, Mrs. McKenna, how many deaths are you responsible for?" "Emily Patterson. Those men who attacked your ranch. Perhaps others we haven't discovered yet." "Every action I've taken has been in defense of innocent people," Clara said steadily, though rage burned in her chest at hearing Emily's name from this man's lips. "How noble," Bradshaw said mockingly. "But I'm not here to debate morality. Mr. McKenna, you have 48 hours to surrender yourself for transport to Washington, where you'll stand trial for war crimes and theft. If you attempt to flee, your entire family will be considered accomplices." After Bradshaw and his men left, the house fell into tense silence. Clara found Jacob in his workshop, not carving, but simply sitting, staring at nothing. "We fight this," she said firmly. "With what?" Jacob's voice was hollow. "He has federal authority, and if what he says about that gold is believed, then we prove it's a lie," Clara interrupted. "Just like we proved Marcus Worthington's lies. Just like we fought every other battle, together." That night, Miguel brought disturbing news. Senor Jacob, I've been asking around. This Bradshaw, he's not just a federal officer. He's been buying up land all along the proposed railroad extension using information he gets from his position. Several families have been forced to sell after he brought charges against them. So he's corrupt, Clara said thoughtfully. That's leverage we can use. It's more than that, Anna added, having joined them in the kitchen. My cousin works at the hotel in San Antonio. She says Bradshaw has been meeting with someone else, a woman who arrived from back east. Elegant, older, with silver hair. Clara's heart sank. She knew even before Anna said it. Margaret Worthington. The matriarch of the Worthington family had returned, and this time she'd brought federal power with her. Clara understood now this wasn't about war crimes or stolen gold. This was about revenge pure and calculated, using the machinery of government to destroy what the Worthingtons couldn't take by force or fraud. She blames us for both her son's downfalls, Clara said quietly, and she's found the perfect weapon in Bradshaw. Over the next 36 hours, Clara mobilized everyone she could. Ben Cooper rode to Austin to search for records about Bradshaw's dealings. Roberto and several other men tracked down surviving witnesses from the war who could testify about the incident in question. Anna used her network of domestic workers to gather information about Bradshaw's activities. But it was young Thomas who provided the breakthrough. He'd been hunting in the hills when he discovered something extraordinary, the actual Confederate gold that Jacob was accused of stealing, hidden in an abandoned mine shaft, along with the skeletal remains of 3 men in Confederate uniforms. They must have hidden it here and died in a cave-in, Thomas explained excitedly. But look at this, Papa. There are documents with them. Orders to hide the gold and blame Union soldiers for its theft. The documents were damaged but legible enough to show the truth. The 3 men Jacob had executed were indeed raiders, but they had also been stealing Confederate gold on their own initiative, planning to blame it on Union forces. Jacob's actions had unknowingly disrupted their scheme. Armed with this evidence, Clara prepared for the confrontation she knew was coming. She sent word to Judge Harrison, who, despite his age, immediately set out from Austin. She gathered affidavits from witnesses. And most importantly, she sent a telegram to a contact she'd cultivated in Washington, a journalist always hungry for stories about government corruption. Bradshaw arrived as promised, bringing a full contingent of marshals and, unsurprisingly, Margaret Worthington. The older woman had aged considerably. Her once proud bearing now stooped with bitterness, but her eyes still burned with hatred when they met Clara's. "You destroyed my family," Margaret said without preamble. "My sons are gone because of you." "Your sons destroyed themselves," Clara replied evenly. "James through his cruelty, Marcus through his greed. I merely refused to be their victim." The confrontation took place in the town square with what seemed like the entire county gathered to witness it. Bradshaw stood pompously reading charges against Jacob, painting him as a war criminal and thief. But when he finished, Clara stepped forward. "Before Mr. McKenna responds to these charges," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square, "perhaps Colonel Bradshaw would like to explain why he's been using his federal position to acquire land along the railroad routes, or why he's been taking bribes from Mrs. Worthington to bring false charges against my husband." Bradshaw's face flushed. "Those are slanderous accusations." "Are they?" Clara produced a leather portfolio. "I have here sworn statements from 3 families you've forced from their homes using similar tactics. I have bank records showing payments from Mrs. Worthington to your personal account. And most importantly," she paused dramatically, "I have the Confederate gold my husband supposedly stole." The crowd gasped as Thomas and Miguel brought forward a strongbox still bearing Confederate markings. Clara opened it, revealing gold coins that gleamed in the sunlight. "Found exactly where the real thieves hid it," Clara continued, showing the recovered documents. "The men my husband executed were criminals who'd stolen from their own cause. He stopped them from committing further atrocities, and now 25 years later their crime is being used to frame him." Judge Harrison, who had arrived just in time for the confrontation, stepped forward. "Colonel Bradshaw, these are serious counter-accusations. I think we need a full investigation." But Bradshaw had made a fatal error. Seeing his scheme collapsing, he drew his pistol, aiming it at Jacob. "I won't let some frontier trash ruin everything." The shot that rang out wasn't from Bradshaw's gun. Clara had drawn and fired in one smooth motion, her bullet striking the colonel's weapon and sending it flying. Before Bradshaw could react, he found himself facing a dozen armed townspeople all ready to defend the McKennas. "Federal officer or not," Sheriff Watson said, stepping forward to arrest Bradshaw, "attempting to murder an innocent man is still a crime." Margaret Worthington stood frozen, watching her last hope for revenge crumble. Clara approached her close enough to speak privately. "It's over," Clara said quietly. "Your vendetta ends here. You can leave peacefully or you can join Bradshaw in custody. Choose." Margaret's face contorted with rage and grief. "You took everything from me." "No," Clara said firmly but not unkindly. "Your sons took everything from themselves through their choices. I just refuse to let them take from me too. There's a difference." For a moment, Clara thought Margaret might attack her physically. Then the fight seemed to drain from the older woman all at once. She turned and walked to her carriage, her back straight, but her steps faltering. She would return east and die within the year, her fortune depleted by failed schemes for revenge, her name forgotten, except as a cautionary tale. The celebration that night was subdued despite their victory. Clara found Jacob standing apart from the crowd, looking older than his 51 years. "How many more times?" he asked quietly. "How many more battles must we fight?" Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of work, the scars from battles fought. "As many as it takes," she said. "But we don't fight alone. Look around you, Jacob. This entire town stood ready to defend us. We've built something here, not just a ranch, but a community. That's our true victory." The months that followed brought unexpected peace. The exposure of Bradshaw's corruption led to a federal investigation that uncovered a network of corrupt officials using their positions for land speculation. Several families who'd been driven from their homes were able to return, and the McKenna name was cleared of all suspicion. More importantly for Clara, the investigation finally brought full justice for Emily Patterson. Documents found in Bradshaw's possession revealed that Margaret Worthington had known about her son's crimes all along and had actively covered them up. Emily's family, still living in poverty in Austin, received compensation from the Worthington estate, and Emily herself was finally acknowledged as a victim rather than a scandal. Clara stood at Emily's grave on a cold December morning, placing flowers on the simple headstone. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered, "but your truth is known now. You're not forgotten. She would be proud of you," a voice said behind her. Clara turned to find an unexpected visitor, James Worthington, himself aged beyond his years. By prison, his once handsome face gaunt and marked by suffering. Clara's hand went instinctively to her weapon, but James raised his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm dying consumption, the doctor says. I have maybe a month. I came to apologize." "Apologize?" Clara's voice was ice. "I know it means nothing. I know it changes nothing, but I need to say it. What I did to Emily, to you, to others, it was monstrous. Prison gave me time to think, to finally see myself clearly. I discussed it even myself." Clara studied him, seeing genuine remorse in his ravaged features. "Why tell me this?" "Because you were the only one who stood up to me. The only one who tried to protect her. I hated you for it then, but now I understand you were the only decent person in that house." He coughed blood speckling his handkerchief. "I've left what remains of my money to a charity for women like Emily. It's not enough, but it's all I can do." He turned to leave, then paused. "That night when Emily died, she called for you at the end. Not her mother, not God. You. She trusted you. Don't carry guilt for failing to save her. You were the only one who tried." Clara watched him shuffle away, a broken man seeking redemption too late. She felt no satisfaction in his suffering, only a deep sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if someone had stopped him sooner. When she returned to Ironwood, she found the house in cheerful chaos. Sarah was teaching young James to dance for the upcoming Christmas social, while Thomas helped Jacob and Miguel string decorations. Anna's children ran through the rooms, their laughter bright as bells. "Mama," Sarah called out, "come see, we've decorated the entire parlor." Clara let herself be pulled into the warmth and light of her home, leaving the ghosts of Austin behind. This was what mattered. This family forged from loss and love. This home defended against all who would destroy it. The Christmas social was held at Ironwood that year, the house overflowing with neighbors and friends. Clara stood in the doorway watching couples dance, children play, and realized that the house that had once been a tomb of grief had become the heart of the community. "Penny for your thoughts," Jacob said, slipping his arm around her waist. "I was thinking about that notice in Garrett's store," Clara said. "How desperate I was when I took that job. How certain I was that I was just looking for a place to hide. And instead I found a place to fight, a place to stand, a place to love." She turned in his arms, looking up at his weathered face, still handsome to her after all these years. "I found you. We found each other," Jacob corrected, then spun her into the dance, their children cheering as their parents joined the celebration. But life, Clara had learned, never stopped testing those it had already tested. Spring brought a drought that threatened the cattle. Summer brought a fever that swept through the county, claiming several elderly residents, including Mrs. Henderson, who died clutching Clara's hand and extracting a promise to keep the town interesting. It was during the fever outbreak that Sarah showed her true character. At 17, she worked tirelessly beside the doctor, nursing the sick with a competence that impressed everyone. When the crisis passed, she announced her intention to study medicine. "Women don't become doctors," one of the town councilmen said dismissively during a town meeting. Sarah stood up, her mother's fire in her eyes. "Women don't take jobs at haunted ranches either. Women don't face down armed criminals. Women don't expose government corruption. Yet my mother did all of that. If she could do the impossible, so can I." The room fell silent. Then Ben Cooper started clapping, followed by others, until the entire assembly was applauding. Clara felt tears on her cheeks, proud beyond words of her daughter's strength. "She's got your spine," Jacob whispered to Clara. "And your stubbornness," Clara whispered back. Thomas, meanwhile, had fallen in love with the daughter of a German immigrant family that had recently settled in the area. The girl Greta was sweet and hard-working, but some in town grumbled about foreigners. It was Miguel who shut down such talk most effectively. "Every person in this room came from somewhere else," he said at a town meeting. "Irish, Scottish, English, Mexican. We're all immigrants or children of immigrants. What matters is what we build together, not where we came from." Young James, the gentle soul of the family, surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to become a teacher. "I want to make sure everyone can read and write," he explained. "Education is the best defense against men like Grant and Worthington." Clara couldn't have been prouder of her children if they'd announced intentions to become presidents and queens. They'd learned the lessons she and Jacob had tried to teach, that strength came in many forms, that community mattered more than convention, that standing for what was right was worth any risk. But the biggest surprise came from Anna. Now in her 40s, she'd built a good life with Roberto, raised 3 children, and had seemed content. Then one evening she approached Clara with an unusual request. "I want to open a shelter," she said, "for women like I was, desperate, abandoned, with nowhere to go. Ironwood saved me. I want to create something similar for others." Clara immediately pledged support, as did Jacob. Within 6 months, the Ironwood Women's Refuge was established on the edge of town, funded by donations from across the county. It would go on to help hundreds of women over the years, becoming a model for similar institutions across Texas. The years continued their relentless march. Thomas married his Greta in a beautiful ceremony that brought together the entire county. Sarah left for medical school in Philadelphia, causing a scandal that Clara secretly delighted in. James went to teachers' college in Austin, carrying with him letters of recommendation from every educated person in 3 counties. Clara and Jacob found themselves in an unexpected position, empty nesters in their 50s, the house suddenly quiet after years of constant activity. They filled the silence by taking in foster children, orphans, and runaways, giving them the same chance Clara had once been given. One of these children would prove particularly significant. Lucy appeared at their door on a stormy night, 13 years old, bruised, and carrying all her possessions in a flour sack. She'd run away from an abusive uncle, traveled 200 miles on foot because she'd heard about Ironwood Ranch, the place where desperate women found safety. "Everyone says Mrs. McKenna helps people," Lucy said, shivering on the doorstep. "Are you her—" "I am," Clara said, already pulling the girl inside. "And you're safe now." Lucy bloomed under their care, revealing a sharp mind and an artistic soul. She painted murals on the barn walls, turning the working building into something beautiful. Her art would eventually hang in galleries in San Antonio and Austin, but she always signed them Lucy of Ironwood, honoring the place that saved her. When Clara turned 60, the town threw a surprise celebration that drew people from across the state. Former Governor Roberts attended, as did several judges, successful ranchers, and most touchingly, dozens of women who'd been helped by the Ironwood Women's Refuge. "You've built something remarkable here," Governor Roberts said, raising a toast. "Not just a successful ranch, but a beacon of hope for those who need it most." Clara stood to respond, looking out at the sea of faces, family friends, former enemies who'd become allies, strangers who'd become family. "I came to Redstone with nothing but desperation and a mother's brooch. I found a job nobody wanted at a ranch everyone feared. But what I really found was proof that broken people can heal each other, that communities can choose courage over fear, that love can grow in the most unlikely soil." She paused, finding Jacob's eyes in the crowd. "My husband likes to say I saved him, but the truth is we saved each other. And then together, we tried to save others. That's all any of us can do, reach out to those who are drowning and pull them to shore just as someone once pulled us." The applause was thunderous, but Clara barely heard it. She was thinking about that scared, desperate woman who'd stood in Garrett's store 40 years ago, staring at a yellowed notice on the wall. Could that woman have imagined this? Could she have dreamed that the job nobody wanted would lead to a life so full, so rich, so meaningful? As the party continued around them, Jacob took her hand and led her to the hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, Ironwood spread out the house, restored and expanded the barns that Lucy had made beautiful, the thriving gardens, the cattle grazing in verdant pastures. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked, as he always did on important anniversaries. Clara considered the question seriously. She thought about Emily Patterson, who she'd failed to save, about the violence they'd been forced to use to defend their home, about the children who'd left to pursue their dreams in distant cities, about the friends they'd lost along the way. "Regrets, yes, some," she said honestly. "But would I change anything?" No. Every choice led us here. Every battle taught us something. Every loss made us value what we had even more. Even taking that job nobody wanted. Especially that, well, Clara said, leaning into his embrace. "That desperate choice was the best decision I ever made." As they stood there watching the sun set over the land they'd fought so hard to protect, a rider approached from town. It was young Tom Garrett Pete's grandson, who now ran the general store. "Mrs. McKenna, Mr. McKenna," he called out. "You need to come quick. There's someone at the store asking about that old help wanted notice, says she needs to know about the woman who answered it 40 years ago." Clara and Jacob exchanged glances, then made their way to town. At the store they found a young woman, perhaps 25, with familiar dark hair and storm-colored eyes. She was holding a journal, her hands trembling slightly. "Are you Clara McKenna?" she asked. "I am." "My name is Emily Patterson. I was named after my aunt who died in Austin." The young woman's voice shook with emotion. "My grandmother saved every newspaper clipping about you, every story about how you tried to save my aunt, how you fought for justice for her. She died last month, and in her things I found this journal. It's my Aunt Emily's. She wrote about you, about how you were the only person who showed her kindness in that house." Clara felt tears streaming down her face as she accepted the journal with shaking hands. Young Emily continued, "I came to thank you, and to tell you that you did save her in a way." In her last entry, she wrote that your courage in standing up to James Worthington gave her the strength to refuse him one last time. She chose her own ending rather than let him continue to destroy her. You gave her that, the knowledge that she had a choice, that she had worth. Clara pulled the young woman into an embrace, both of them crying now. "She was so young, so bright. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." "You did everything you could," Emily said firmly, "and you've continued to do it for others ever since. The Ironwood Women's Refuge has saved hundreds of women. My aunt's death wasn't in vain. It started something. You started something." That night, Clara read Emily Patterson's journal by lamplight, Jacob beside her, offering silent support. The entries were painful, but also revealed a young woman of intelligence and spirit, Someone who might have done great things if given the chance. The final entry, dated the night of her death, was addressed to Clara. Miss Whitmore, if you ever read this, know that you gave me something precious in my final day's dignity. You saw me as a person, not a scandal. You fought for me when no one else would. I'm choosing to end my pain, but I want you to know this isn't your failure. It's my choice, perhaps the only real choice I've ever been allowed to make. Please don't carry guilt for me. Instead, carry on fighting for others. Be the voice for those who cannot speak. Be the strength for those who cannot stand. You have a warrior's heart, Miss Whitmore. Use it. Clara closed the journal, her throat tight with emotion. Even in death, Emily Patterson had shown remarkable grace and wisdom. The next morning, Clara made a decision. She would write everything down, the full story of Ironwood Ranch from that first desperate day to the present. Not for glory or recognition, but as a testament to all those who'd fought alongside them, all those who'd been lost along the way, all those who'd found hope in a place that had once held only grief. She spent the next year writing, filling journal after journal with the story. Sarah, home from medical school for a visit, helped her organize the narrative. Thomas contributed his memories of growing up during the conflicts. James provided the scholarly framework, having become a respected historian as well as teacher. Even Jacob, normally reticent about the past, shared his perspective on those dark years after Sarah and baby Thomas's deaths. When the memoir was complete, Clara didn't seek publication. Instead, she placed it in the town archive with instructions that it be made available to anyone who needed to read it, especially women facing impossible situations. People fighting against powerful enemies, anyone who needed to know that courage was possible even in the darkest times. The story spread anyway, passed from person to person, inspiring some, warning others, but always testifying to the power of refusing to give up. Clara lived to see her grandchildren grow up, to see Sarah become the first female doctor in 3 counties, to see Thomas turn Ironwood into one of the most successful ranches in Texas, to see James establish a school that educated children regardless of their ability to pay. On her final evening at the age of 81, Clara sat on the porch where she'd kept so many watches, fought so many battles, celebrated so many victories. Jacob was beside her, their hands linked as they'd been for nearly 50 years. "I've been thinking about that notice again," she said, her voice still clear despite her age. "The job nobody wanted?" Jacob asked, smiling at the familiar topic. "Yes. I wonder if it was ever really about the job at all. Maybe it was about the chance to matter, to fight for something, to build something lasting." "You did all that and more," Jacob said softly. "We did it," Clara corrected, as she always had. "Together." As the sun set over Ironwood Ranch one last time for Clara McKenna, she thought about all the women who would come after her, all the battles yet to be fought, all the chances yet to be taken. She'd shown them it was possible that a desperate woman with nothing but courage could change the world one stand at a time. The job nobody wanted had become a legacy nobody could ignore.